spitting image is back, and this time, the targets are Harry and Meghan. The sketch did not hold back, did not soften the edges, and did not offer the kind of light, friendly ribbing that celebrities can absorb with a smile and a retweet.
Iconic comedy show, the puppet satire Spitting Image was back, but this time he is being mercilessly, ruthlessly mocked.
It went straight for the most sensitive spots: the ambition, the attention-seeking, the power dynamic, the contradiction between the freedom narrative and the constant spotlight. And by multiple accounts, the reaction from the Sussex side was not calm. This is worth talking about seriously, not because Spitting Image is a documentary or a work of journalism or a piece of analysis that can be fact-checked and sourced. It is none of those things. It is entertainment, and it should be treated as entertainment, but it is also doing something in the public conversation that no amount of royal commentary and no number of newspaper columns quite manages to replicate. It creates a shared cultural moment, a joke that millions of people experience at the same time, in the same format, arriving at the same punchline. And long after the specific lines are forgotten, the underlying observation remains. That is how satire works. It is not the funniest thing that people remember. It is the truest thing inside the funniest thing.
If I'm going to succeed in America, I need a lifestyle brand of creams and supplements. Gwyneth Paltrow has Goop, Kourtney Kardashian has Poosh, and Jamie Lee Curtis has Poogert. Now I've got mine, Meg Goo, celebrating the sexy earth goddess in all of us.
Tonight, we are going to walk through the sketch itself, why it landed the way it did, what it says about how public perception has shifted, and why a satirical puppet program might be doing more to shape the wider conversation around Harry and Meghan right now than almost anything else in the British media landscape. Let's start with what Spitting Image actually did, because the specifics matter more than the general observation that they were harsh. The puppet version of Meghan Markle arrived ruthless. She was portrayed as someone obsessed with control, always thinking 3 moves ahead, positioning every public appearance and every statement as part of a larger strategic calculation designed to advance the brand rather than to simply live life. Her hunger for celebrity was exaggerated, as satire always does, but the exaggeration was pointed and specific. One scene showed her puppet crashing a Michelle Obama book event, as if her status gave her automatic access to any room she chose to enter.
More following Granny's rules. Don't wear your pants on your head, Harry. Don't barf on the butler, Harry. If I want to play polo in my living room, who's gonna stop me?
Stop that.
Right away, Meg.
The entitlement was played for laughs, but the joke only works if the audience already believes the underlying observation has some basis in how Meghan is perceived. That is how satire operates at its most effective. It does not invent the perception from nothing. It identifies a perception that already exists somewhere in the culture, verifies through audience testing that the perception is widely enough shared to be funny rather than baffling, and then pushes it until it becomes visible and comic. The specific choice of the Michelle Obama setting is worth noting because it was not random. Meghan and Michelle Obama have been publicly linked in the commentary world for years, both described as trailblazers, both connected to progressive American political culture, both associated with the kind of aspirational public identity that generates genuine warmth. By staging a scene in which Meghan's puppet treats that world as something to which she is owed access rather than something she has earned through it, the sketch makes a specific comment about the gap between the identity Meghan presents publicly and the identity a significant portion of the audience perceives her to actually inhabit. The Harry puppet was, in some ways, even more striking, not because it was harsher, but because of what it chose to portray. Rather than the respected prince, the war veteran, the mental health advocate, the Harry most people formed their opinion of over the first 3 decades of his life, the puppet was shown as a man searching for relevance in a world that has moved on.
All right, I've finished my clippy. Where it says signature, do I put the royal seal?
That's not necessary, Mr. of Wales. I see here that your previous career was in realty.
Royalty, but it wasn't a career. My wife's got a Netflix empire.
Awkward, uncertain, reactive rather than decisive. In one scene, he pitches Meghan for a movie role, like a manager trying to secure work for a client whose star has dimmed. The sketch referenced a real and widely reported moment. Harry actually did speak to a Disney executive about opportunities for Meghan at a red carpet film premiere, in a moment that was filmed and circulated and generated its own wave of commentary at the time. That fact had been logged and mostly forgotten. The sketch retrieved it, exaggerated it, and turned it into a scene that made people simultaneously laugh and wince. Harry's puppet had one detail that was particularly resonant, and that separated this sketch from lighter royal satire. At one point, it complained about being fifth in line to the throne, as though that statistical fact of birth were a personal injustice. That could have been a throwaway gag. But the show went one step further. The puppet was shown as aware that it was a puppet, controlled. Moving through scenes it had not authored. That detail turned a cheap observation into something with considerably more weight. A comment not just on Harry's present situation, but on how a significant portion of the audience has come to interpret the last several years. A man who once had a clearly defined role inside the most recognizable institution in the world, who stepped away from that role, and who has spent the years since building a replacement structure that many observers feel has never quite achieved the same coherence or solidity. The power dynamic sketch was the element that generated the most sustained discussion outside of the specific scenes. Meghan's puppet ran the show. Harry's puppet kept up as best it could, reacting to situations rather than driving them, following a script that appeared to have been written by someone else.
What I'm producing for you is going to be huge. Tell Eldon all about it.
It's about a beautiful young swan, but no one treats her like the beautiful swan she is until season 2, when everyone apologizes to her.
That observation, the imbalance, the sense of one person leading and one person being led, is not a new one in royal commentary. It has been circulating for years, usually in coded language, usually attributed to anonymous palace sources, usually presented with enough diplomatic hedging to stay just short of being a definable claim. Spitting Image said it directly and without apology, in the specific way that only satire is allowed to be direct. No qualification, no sourcing note, no according to a person close to the situation. Just the puppet dynamic, playing it out for 2 minutes, letting the audience draw whatever conclusion they were already inclined to draw. The most memorable and most discussed specific scene involved Meghan's puppet calmly managing Harry like a professional project rather than a partner. Composed, focused, completely in control, while he fumbled through situations and tried to keep pace. It is, as satire, broad, but it draws on a perception that has been building in commentary circles since at least the early Sussex years, and in some quarters considerably before. The sketch does not create that perception. It finds it already sitting in the culture, polishes it up, and gives it a puppet face. Whether that perception is accurate is a separate question from whether it has cultural currency. Spitting Image is not in the business of journalism. It is in the business of reflection, showing an audience the version of reality they already half believe, exaggerated enough to make them laugh, specific enough to make them think. Satire has a particular and specific relationship with uncomfortable truths that sets it apart from every other form of public commentary. It cannot be sued for stating a view if the view is framed as exaggeration. It cannot be accused of cruelty because the format signals from the first frame that the ordinary rules of discourse are suspended. It does not need sources or documents or palace briefings. It simply makes observations in a form that people laugh at, and the laugh deposits the observation somewhere it stays. A Spitting Image sketch goes viral because it is funny, but once people have laughed at it, the observation underneath the joke sits somewhere in their thinking in a way that a newspaper column does not always achieve. The laugh is the delivery mechanism. The observation is what remains. If Palace Insider is giving you the full picture that other channels skip, go ahead and hit the like button. It genuinely helps us reach more people. Subscribe to Palace Insider and drop a comment below. Did you think the Spitting Image parody was fair satire, or did it go too far? The reaction from the Sussex side, according to multiple reports, was not the kind of measured non-response that a confident public figure usually deploys in these situations. The standard playbook for someone with a strong public image who gets satirized by a comedy show is straightforward. Say nothing or acknowledge it with a light touch, something that signals you can take a joke, and then move on quickly. What was reported instead was something considerably less composed. The word used in multiple accounts was that Meghan reportedly wanted an apology from the program. That detail, whether every element of it is fully accurate or not, became its own story because requesting an apology from a satirical puppet program is not a move that any seasoned communication strategy would recommend. It draws more attention to the sketch. It signals that the content landed somewhere real rather than bouncing off harmlessly. It confirms for everyone watching that the reaction was not strategic, it was emotional. And that gap, Between the polished, intentional, carefully managed image the Sussex brand projects in every other context and the unguarded emotional response a piece of puppet satire apparently produced, is itself the most revealing thing about the entire episode. Not the jokes, not the puppets, not even the specific scenes. The fact that this particular form of criticism appears to have broken through defenses that tabloid front pages, royal biographies, and critical commentators have spent years trying to penetrate. The sketch landed because it found the space between the public narrative and the private feeling, and the reaction confirmed that the space exists. Now let's talk about what the sketch was actually saying underneath the jokes, because this is where the cultural analysis becomes more interesting than the comedy recap. Because spitting image is not random. The writers research their targets. The specific observations they choose to lampoon are selected because they resonate with enough of the audience to make the humor land. And because the audience's recognition is what turns an observation into a joke. When the show decided to portray Meghan as someone endlessly strategic and Harry as someone who has lost his footing, they were not inventing that perception. They were reflecting it back. The underlying critique that runs through the sketch is about the contradiction at the center of the Sussex public identity. The couple left the royal family citing a desire for privacy, for autonomy, for freedom from the institutional pressures of the monarchy. That is the foundation of the narrative they have presented across every major interview, documentary, and publication since 2020. They position their departure as a liberation from scrutiny, from control, from a system that was not working for them. But simultaneously, by any observable measure, they have never been more publicly visible, more commercially active, or more dependent on public attention than they have been in the years since that departure. Every project they have produced since 2020 has been built on the same foundation, the story of who they are in relation to the institution they left, and what that institution did or did not do to them. Every interview has circled back to the palace years. Every commercial deal has been predicated on the royal connection providing the audience. The memoir sold because Harry described private family conversations that the palace years made possible. The Netflix documentary generated curiosity because it promised insider conflict rooted in the institutional life they left. The brand that followed trades on the aesthetic of royalty without the obligations of royal service. The sketch skewers this contradiction directly and specifically. The puppets talk about escaping the system, while every punchline pulls them deeper into the version of the system they rebuilt around themselves. Instead of the monarchy, there are streaming deals. Instead of royal engagements, there are brand launches and media appearances. Instead of institutional protocol, there is media strategy and content operation. The structure is different. The dependency on public attention, and on the royal story specifically, is identical. That is the core argument Spitting Image is making. Not with a newspaper column, not with a documented source, not with a palace briefing, with a puppet show that millions of people watch on their phones and whose observations sit somewhere in their thinking the next time a Sussex story appears in their feed. The format bypasses all the usual defenses against criticism because it does not have the form of criticism. It has the form of entertainment. It cannot be accused of being a tabloid attack. It cannot be the subject of a legal action. It simply makes people laugh, and the laugh does the work. There is also something worth noting about the cultural timing of this sketch, because it did not arrive in a vacuum. Spitting Image has returned at a moment when the mainstream British press is more openly and broadly critical of the Sussex operation than it has been at any point since the original departure. The editorial split inside the Daily Mail over Project Thaw versus the Boshoff assessment that nobody wants to see Meghan. The Invictus financial scrutiny and the board departures, the anniversary post that landed in A-list celebrity silence, the Boshoff and Froelich commentary about wishes being published as news. All of that has been building across several months, and the cumulative effect has been a visible shift in the tone of coverage that was, even a year ago, more careful and more balanced. Spitting Image did not create this shift. It arrived inside it. But its arrival is itself a signal, because comedy shows of this kind tend to follow cultural temperature rather than leading it. The 1980s Spitting Image was savage about Thatcher and Reagan because those were the dominant political figures of their era, and the audience was ready to see them lampooned. The current version is making choices about what the audience in 2025 is ready to receive. The choice to focus on Harry and Meghan in this particular way, with this particular level of aggression, tells you something important about what the production team believes the British audience is prepared to find funny rather than uncomfortable. they would not have made this sketch in 2019. The cultural temperature was genuinely different. The British public still had residual warmth for Harry specifically, from the military service, from the mental health campaigns, from the years as a working royal during which he appeared to be doing the job with sincerity. That warmth has, by every available polling measure and by every observable signal in the public conversation, reduced considerably. Spitting Image made this sketch now because now is when it lands. The cultural permission to satirize Harry and Meghan in this specific way and at this level of aggression, without significant public backlash, is something the show's writers would have tested and confirmed before committing to it. The fact that they committed to it, and committed to it at this level, is itself a piece of cultural evidence about where the moment currently sits in the public conversation. The sketch also captures something about the Harry narrative specifically that goes beyond the relatively easy jokes about Meghan's ambition and control. And that specific dimension deserves its own moment of careful analysis because it is the less obvious and arguably more interesting part of what the show is doing. The portrait of Harry as a man who once had a clearly defined identity, Captain General of the Royal Marines, patron of organizations with genuine institutional weight embedded in a network of purpose that the monarchy provided, and who now finds himself navigating a world in which none of those structures apply, is one of the more genuinely interesting observations the show makes. It is not simply a cruel portrait, and it is worth crediting the show for that distinction. It is a somewhat melancholy one, even inside its comedic framing. The puppet who knows it is a puppet. The man who walked away from the institution that gave him his identity and has found that the identity constructed in its place never quite achieves the same structural stability. That is not a character being mocked without sympathy. That is a character the show seems to view with a kind of complicated recognition, aware of the genuine difficulty of the situation, still finding it funny, and not pretending those two things are incompatible. That complexity is what distinguishes the best satire from simple mockery. Simple mockery says you are ridiculous. Satire at its sharpest says you are human. This is where you have ended up, and the gap between where you thought you were going and where you actually are is genuinely comic. The Spitting Image. Harry sits somewhere in that second category, which is, perversely, a form of dignity the show extends to him even while making him the butt of the joke. Whether that reading reaches most viewers, whether the sympathy inside the joke registers alongside the joke itself, will depend entirely on what those viewers bring to the screen with them, and what they have already concluded about the last 5 years. The Sussex story maps onto so many pre-existing attitudes about class, about celebrity, about the monarchy, about what public figures owe their audience, that two people watching the same sketch can come away with completely opposite experiences of what they just saw. If you already think Harry made a serious error in leaving and has struggled to recover his footing since, the sketch confirms that reading. If you think he made the right decision and has been unfairly targeted ever since, the sketch looks like another attack from a culture that refuses to allow him the distance he sought. That division is, ultimately, why the Sussex story continues to generate this much heat 5 years after the departure. It has become a Rorschach test for attitudes that predate Harry and Meghan and will comfortably outlast them. Spitting Image did not create those divisions. It just found the precise place where they all intersect, put two puppets there, and let the audience bring everything else. The final observation worth making is the most specific one. The sketch is reported to have made Meghan genuinely angry, apparently wanting an apology angry, in multiple accounts. That is interesting not because it proves the portrayal was accurate, but because of what it suggests about the relationship between the Sussex public image and the particular form of criticism that satire represents. For years, the standard response to critical coverage has been to contest it, counter it, seek legal redress for it, or describe it as coming from a hostile and specifically motivated British press. That framework has worked to some degree in the American media environment, where the British tabloid reputation provides a ready narrative, but it works considerably less well when the critique comes from a comedy program, from a panel of commentators who have been broadly sympathetic for years, from editorial voices inside the newspaper that has been running Project Thaw. Satire occupies a special space in this landscape. It cannot be accused of a tabloid vendetta. It cannot be characterized as palace briefing dressed up as journalism. It is, by its nature, a cultural reflection rather than an editorial position. And that makes it considerably harder to contest without appearing to confirm the thing it is saying. The puppet said what a significant portion of the audience has been thinking. The reaction, if the reports are accurate, confirmed that the people being puppeted knew exactly where the observation had landed. And that confirmation, unguarded, apparently genuine, clearly not part of the strategy, is perhaps the most revealing moment the entire episode produced. Not the sketch itself, the response to it. That is the most culturally revealing thing the whole episode produced. Do you think Spitting Image was making a fair and broadly accurate satirical point about the Sussex brand and the contradiction at its center? Or did it cross a line into something more damaging than satire should be? Drop your take in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you do not miss what comes next. And a like genuinely helps us reach more people who want this kind of analysis. See you in the next one. The framework that positioned all criticism as motivated institutional attack was built to handle a specific kind of opponent. Spitting Image is not that kind of opponent. You cannot call it a tabloid vendetta because it is not a tabloid. You cannot accuse it of palace briefing. You cannot characterize a puppet as racially motivated. The usual defenses do not fit this particular form of criticism. And in reaching for them anyway, in apparently seeking an apology from a comedy program, the response may have confirmed exactly what the sketch was suggesting, that the gap between the public confidence and the private reaction is larger than the communication strategy is designed to cover. The puppets found that gap. The reaction confirmed it exists. That combination, the observation, the laugh, and the unguarded confirmation from the subjects themselves, is what makes this sketch a genuinely meaningful cultural moment in the longer Sussex story, and what will make it worth remembering long after the specific jokes have faded from memory. One more thing worth saying clearly before we leave this topic entirely. The fact that a puppet show has generated this much serious analysis is itself part of the story. Spitting Image is comedy. Its primary purpose is entertainment, and the individual sketches should be evaluated as entertainment first and as cultural analysis second. But cultural commentary that lands widely enough to generate its own news cycle, its own wave of public discussion, and its own apparently significant reaction from the targets, that has crossed from entertainment into something that sits in both categories simultaneously. A comedy that the wider audience discusses as though it were journalism, and that the subjects appear to have treated as something requiring a formal institutional response. That is precisely what makes this particular moment culturally unusual. And that combination, the comic form, the cultural weight, the broad public reach, and the apparently unusually unguarded reaction from the subjects, is what makes it worth understanding as something more than just funny television. It is funny television that tells you something real about where the cultural conversation currently sits. Do you think Spitting Image was making a fair satirical point about the Sussex brand and the contradiction at its center? Or did it go too far? Drop your take in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you do not miss what comes next. And a like genuinely helps us reach more people. See you in the next one.